And, of course, we'll jump right into some pretty important news, which I actually haven't yet covered while I've been here. It was Tuesday night. Daryl, you were here filling in for me, and y'all covered this Ferguson situation.
Yes, and apparently things are just getting worse there.
Have you seen updates from today? Because I have to admit, I'm still kind of catching up on the news
last updates that I saw were from last night, and I had covered one of the stories on my daily 5-minute newscast this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently there's been some kind of state of emergency called. The governor out there in Missouri, Jade Nixon, has called like the National Guard to come in to help, patrol the streets. One of my Facebook friends who lives in the St. Louis area reported that she was at one of the protests last night and that nothing bad happened at the protest that she was at. But that doesn't mean that bad things didn't happen at another protest. And I know Wednesday night things got really crazy.
So before we get a little bit further into this, can somebody just give a brief synopsis of what happened? Because I don't believe I'm fully up to date on the Ferguson situation.
Okay, so on Saturday, nearly 1 week ago, would have been 6 days ago today, there was a young black man, 17 years old, who had...
I've seen 18, but okay.
All of the reports that I saw that,
He's
are...
the one shot by the police, right?
Yeah, he was shot by the police. The age that I've seen, his parents both mentioned, he was 17.
Gotcha. Not that it really matters.
It might have been something to where, like his birthday was coming up and he was about to turn 18.
Okay.
But, either way, 17 or 18, he was, right around that age, had graduated high school a couple of months ago, was set to have begun college on Monday. And there was some interaction with a police officer, and depending on which account you believe, and there's two accounts, the two living witnesses that saw the account or saw the interaction have one account, and they both agree on that account. The police officer has another account of what happened, but the one thing that all of them agree on is that Michael Brown was 35 feet away from the police officer. He was running away from the police officer when the police officer shot him in the back and killed him.
Wow. And this was allegedly over him conducting a robbery. Is that right?
That just came out today, that there was some kind of robbery.
Yeah, I heard there was footage of Michael Brown, the victim in this case, robbing some sort of convenience store, allegedly.
Yeah, I had not heard that until today.
Right, I did see pictures from that video, and it looks like he was harassing the clerk there. So
yeah, I don't know what. Right, I haven't read any detail on that story. I just saw the screenshots in the headline there. But presuming he had a weapon with him, I'm sure there.
He was unarmed.
Okay, he was unarmed.
The police admit that he was unarmed.
Well, even if he did have a weapon and was threatening the clerk with the weapon, I don't think it's appropriate to shoot somebody in the back as
from
they're
35 feet away.
No, that seems very cowardly. Like, I don't believe that something like that warrants a death sentence.
But it's probably legal, as I understand it. The police have some sort of rule that says that if they're in pursuit of what they believe to be a felon, or if somebody who has just committed a felony, obviously they're not a felon until they're convicted.
Right.
But if the police officer determines that there's a felony in progress or has just happened, that they have the ability to shoot to kill. And so odds are good that this officer, and I believe that the information about the officer has recently been released. They were trying to keep that under wraps, and I think Anonymous got involved in that.
I believe, based on the order of the way that I saw the various reports come out today, it was after Anonymous released the identity of the police officer that he was part of a robbery came out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was never mentioned from Saturday until Friday morning. It was never mentioned that there was supposedly a robbery. The robbery only wound up getting mentioned after the identity of the police officer came out. as I'm guessing, to sort of justify the actions by the police officer. One would think that if there was a robbery that had happened immediately prior to this, that it would have been in the initial police reports. Because remember, about 2.5 years ago here in Keene, there were the two guys that, or it might have been three guys that allegedly broke into a computer store here in Keene. And one of the guys got captured on the scene. Somebody else was fleeing the scene in a motor vehicle.
Right.
And then got shot in the back of the head by the Keene police.
The back of the throat, but yes.
Okay, I heard head, but still,
Shoot to
head,
kill.
neck area.
Yep.
He was shot from behind and died. And they made sure to put in their police report, fled the
Fleeing,
scene of a burglary. One would think that if Michael Brown had fled the scene of a burglary or something that was alleged to have been a burglary, it would have been in the initial police report. But that's neither here nor there at this point. The community went and had a candlelight vigil on, I believe it was late Saturday, early Sunday. And there were people that were saying some unpleasant things, kill police. And I don't agree with that. I don't support that sentiment. But if you want to go have a vigil of, hey, hold this guy accountable for killing someone. And there have been people that's their whole purpose of going out. Other people are going out and just starting
Looting.
to loot stores that had absolutely nothing to do with the incident.
Well, there's so many different aspects of this to talk about. I mean, I understand how difficult it can be when you're doing activism, and the people who aren't looting are the ones doing the activism here, going out and protesting, candlelight vigils, things like that. Once something becomes past a certain size, once it grows to the point of having 50 people, 25 people maybe even, the more people that are involved, the more likely someone's going to show up and do something stupid.
Right.
Someone's going to show up and do something dangerous and destroy property, and then of course it makes everybody look bad because people think in groups. So we've encountered this in Keene.
Once you're in that group of a certain size, the responsibility is removed from you as an individual, so it's much more justifiable if you go and loot somebody's store, or at least you can't be blamed for it personally because there's all these people around you that are full of energy, and it's very easy to turn into something like a riot.
You can certainly be blamed for it personally if video footage catches you looting a store in that case, but people do get caught up in the moment. That's no excuse for what's been going on. So you're welcome to share your thoughts on Ferguson, Missouri, and of course the police state that has assembled there, which is a whole other aspect of this. There was the initial story of this guy being shot in the back, and of course people are going to disagree on whether or not somebody who committed a robbery who's running away, it's justified to shoot somebody like that in the back. I say it's not.
And I still think that the robbery is later detail that was added to try to give some sort of justification to what the police did, because again, I've been following this since Saturday and never heard anything about a robbery until earlier today.
Yeah, well, I don't know anything about the robbery as far as when it is alleged to have occurred. Was it that same night? Was it from days earlier? There's a lot of information to absorb. You're welcome to add in what you've observed at 855-450-FREE. And then there's the police state aspect of this, where people are finally seeing, a lot of people maybe for the first time, they're seeing what all these Bearcats and all this military equipment can amount to. And is this something that makes you feel safe and secure? The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. Join us here on Free Talk Live. David is with us listening in Raleigh to Talk Radio 850. Hey, David.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for taking my call. How you doing?
Yeah, go for it. What's on your mind?
Well, the situation with that individual and the policeman, I don't know I can't say what started it. It's really hard by hearing all these things. But one thing's for sure, if you start looking at how they're being militarized, and I'm in an industry where I sell raw materials to DLA and government, military. I've been on all kinds of contracts. I sell armor plating that they're retrofitting all these, armored APCs, all these mine-resistant vehicles that all these police departments are getting. one thing's for sure. If you look at everything that's going on with the DHS and their ammo buildup, the militarizing of these guys, how they want to put all the restrictions on us and basically try to, ban all these magazines and basically everything they have. They don't want us to have what they have, and they're arming up looking like soldiers. All the executive orders preparing for martial law. You got the NDAA, you got the NDRP. We've got these criminals up there that are getting subpoenaed like Holder. They just don't go. I mean, the president doesn't do anything about it. I mean, if you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, this whole thing, it's getting pretty scary.
Now, does it make you feel, do you feel guilty? Do you have a tough time sleeping at night knowing that you're selling equipment to the very people who may be using that equipment to oppress you someday?
Well, the guy who's doing the work, he's just as nervous. Obviously, he wants the business, and everybody's scratching their heads, kind of like, what's really going on here? So, I know it's not for our protection. It's not like we're going to get invaded. I wish the Chinese would come over here. I mean, we've never been invaded. The Japanese were afraid to come over here. I mean, how is anybody going to take on over 120 million heavily armed Americans that are law-abiding? Probably 120 million of us pass federal background checks, but yet we're all getting demonized by all these guys. And, if you look at everything that's going on, and I do a lot of research and reading, and I don't watch the news. I'd rather listen to you guys on the radio, and you just take little, information you get everywhere. You start putting the pieces together. This is really scary stuff,
So, yeah, I totally agree with you that it is pretty scary, and the police are definitely being militarized. They brought a Bearcat, one of these armored personnel carriers that's, armored up. They got a 50 cal mount on the top. They brought one of these things to Keene, right here, Little Keene, New Hampshire. I mean, there's only 25,000 people that live here. So cities and small towns around the country have been given this military equipment by the federal government, and for years have been buying and arming up. And they also, they even do psychological things, like they'll change their uniforms to black from blue.
Yeah,
exactly.
And they, have a policy of putting on dark sunglasses to where you can't make eye contact like a human being with the police. And they're also trained to be intimidating. They're trained to tell lies. So they want to just get convictions. They want to make arrests. They don't want to help people. I'm not saying that all cops are like that. There are some police who I think do want to help people.
These guys they really don't look like police. I mean, my daughter's car alarm was malfunctioning. The police came out. I'm obviously in North Carolina. I think we're in a pretty good place as far as, gun rights. You can carry guns in bars now if you're not drinking. I mean, we're doing better than a lot of places. And the police showed up for a malfunctioning car alarm. My daughter answers the door. First thing these guys say, and they're not all tacked out. They look like normal sheriffs or whatever. We're going to kill your dog if it comes out here. They're just
Seriously?
really aggressive.
They really just said that?
And she called me up saying, hey, they said they were going to shoot the dog. It's the first thing out of their mouth. And, because she's a registered American Pit Bull Terrier. She's a sweet little dog. Never harmed anybody, anything, dogs or nothing. Their dog never put a tooth in anything. This is the way they are. They want to shoot dogs. They want to, all the brutality. They just tase you,
David, I want to thank you, man.
The buildup is really scary. The 2 billion rounds of ammo, with the Chicago guy.
Right, and it's not going to stop. I mean, they're just going to keep getting more and more and more, and they're going to get more and disconnected from their humanity and their ability to connect with the people around them. They're going to continue to have this mindset inculcated within them that it's us versus them. This is one of the mindsets that the police are very commonly have, is that the rest of us are their subjects and they are our masters.
And one thing that a lot of police departments have been doing over the last 15 or 20 years is recruiting people that are just out of the military. Oh, you just got back from Afghanistan. Great. Come join the police department.
Now you're good at following orders.
I shoot a lot. We have guns. My son and I shoot recreationally. I mean, everything that we have is strictly, it's not even for defensive. We just like to shoot guns. We hunt. It's recreational. And you have a situation brewing here where you're getting these guys right out of the military, and I know a guy that we shoot with, and he did a bunch of tours over there, and he flat out told me, a post-traumatic stress syndrome for him is he just has a hard time fitting in. Like, he's just so used to kicking down doors every day of his life and running in and blowing people away that are, obviously pointing guns at him when they walk in these situations when they're clearing, insurgent areas or whatever. But he flat out told me, man, I hear a car backfire or something. I'm ready to go off. So these guys are already on edge. It's the only thing they know. Whether they're on, I'm not saying military guys are like this and not like, are like this in general.
Yeah, I don't want to make it clear. I don't want to generalize that all police are a bunch of thugs. I don't think that's true. I think there are some out there that are trying to do as best they can in a broken, hobbled system. And I thank you, David, for your call and thoughts tonight. Appreciate it. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. However, I think there is a consistent theme of militarization of the police. There's no doubt about it, from the equipment that they've been purchasing and that they've been granted by the federal government, literal military leftovers. The Bearcat, as I understand it, was a failed piece of military equipment.
Yes.
Because it didn't have enough protection, shielding from IEDs, as I understand it. So bombs coming from underneath the vehicle apparently was a problem with the Bearcat. So let's give them to the police departments.
Right, and something I'm really curious about is that if you're somebody that's for freedom and liberty and you want to protect your family and your friends and everybody that you know from, basically an invasion of your livelihood from, these aggressive officers or military members who are benefiting from this kind of machinery or armor plating or whatever it is that you're producing, I would think that you would want to change professions at some point. And I feel like if a lot of people just decided to not show up to work at one point, then, they'd kind of be out of luck and they'd be scrambling to find more people to produce these things for them.
Those jobs, though, they generally tend to pay well.
Yeah.
Which means that you're not going to have a hard time finding people to fill those jobs.
That's a good point.
I've had jobs before where they're like, yeah, go ahead. Quit. There's 15 people that want your job.
And also, what percentage of their business goes to government as well? Is it the supermajority? Is it a half their business is going to government? And what percentage makes it objectionable? Is it 10%? Do you have to quit if 10% of their contracts are government contracts? I mean, you used to make guns, Daryl. More coming up. It's Free Talk Live. Menard, who is listening to Talk Radio 850 in Raleigh. Hello, Menard.
Hey, how you doing?
Welcome. You're on the air.
One of the things, you're talking about the militarization of the police, when they build, there's a 10-year plan, basically, that's typically done. I saw it in telecom, and you see it in the military. So all the APCs, which are Army personnel carriers, and you get the MARs and the weaponry, which are the machine guns and whatnot, they're basically produced en masse. You have contracts and whatnot. And so basically, 1/3 of what is produced probably makes it to battle, which is Iraq or Afghanistan. The 2/3 are sitting here in Army bases. So once that conflict is over, basically, they're sitting there, as we call it, mothballed. Mm-hmm. So over time, they've been paid for and everything else. So then they bring them out. Now, here's the other thing that's very that could possibly be an issue is over time, you basically process these through all the police and civic organizations, well, not civic, but the police organizations throughout the country. And over time, you have a potential where you can basically create martial law. And we're seeing a hint of that today, especially in Ferguson, bringing all that high-powered armor out, plus all the, the weaponry. So basically, and I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying that's a potential because, America, if you look back in World War II, everything that we had sent overseas, and I actually been in some of the battlefields back in the Pacific, and a lot of stuff, it was not even, they had landing craft and whatnot that were just sitting there rusting on these South Sea islands. And, they brought the big ships back, but a lot of the stuff they just dumped. I can tell you, I was in Guadalcanal, and they dumped B-17s, they dumped tanks, everything right there in the lagoon. And so that was back in 1945. But today, with the price tag being, a lot more heavier than what it is today, that material is sitting here, and so basically, if you look at a potential, or let's say a philosophy of the upper governmental regime or the whatnot.
All they have to do is flip the switch, and they can turn that stuff on for their purposes, whatever they might be.
Yeah, well, the thing is here. It's here. I mean, it's like, and here's the other little clue that's coming on, is when you get Homeland Security securing so many rounds of ammunition, which we've never heard of before. Obviously, something is gearing up in the works.
From CNN, this is Tim Lynch, the director of the Cato Institute's Project on Criminal Justice. He writes that the stories coming out of Ferguson paint an increasingly worrying picture, that of a middle America city like most, any other being turned into a war zone. It began with the shooting death of Michael Brown by a local police officer, which seemed questionable, but the feeling in the community was the police could not conduct a real, impartial investigation. When the police department declined to identify the officer involved, protests began. Now, if a listener didn't know any better, he would think the description of the events unfolding in Ferguson must surely be taking place in Iraq or Afghanistan. Combat armored shock troops shoot tear gas into crowds, while snipers train high-powered rifles on groups of civilians from atop heavily armored MRAP, mine-resistant ambush-protected assault vehicles, rolling through and blocking off city streets like tanks. This is America, but it doesn't look like it anymore. Republican Representative Justin Amash of Missouri tweeted in the morning, quote, "Images and reports out of Ferguson are frightening. Is this a war zone or a U.S. city? Government escalates tensions with military equipment and tactics." That's a great point, that the government here certainly is not doing de-escalation style work. It's not bringing communities together. It's not helping heal wounds. It's bringing in the troops and holding, basically taking over a city.
Right, and the most ironic part of this, I find, is that in the article I was just reading, it mentions how Obama made the statement, we need to have peace in Ferguson, and yet he's not doing anything about it except saying that. He's on vacation right now.
Well, what's he going to do about it exactly? I mean, what he is doing is he's sending Bearcats and MRAPs into all these various police departments.
Right, and I mean, he's the commander-in-chief. Like, ultimately, he's the one who has control over the military and the police force. So if this is really such an issue, he could at least, like, I don't know, maybe say something to the police chief there, like, maybe you guys should take a step back.
I don't think the president has any direct authority over any police department.
Well, except for maybe federal police. I mean, he's the top executive dog. He would be in charge of like the DEA and Fed cops,
right? But they're not considered a police department. They certainly
I see what you mean.
have policing powers.
City. You mean municipal police
right,
departments.
But when people think of police department, they don't think FBI, CIA.
So let's continue here. Pictures and videos tweeted out of the war zone show what appear to be camouflaged units of soldiers occupying and subduing the outraged civilians of Ferguson. But these are not soldiers. They are police officers. How could a small local police force act like an occupying military force? Under what is called Program 1033, the Department of Defense has been doling out military surplus to police departments for use in causes like the domestic wars against drugs and terrorism. Billions of dollars of military arms and armament have been distributed to local police departments since the program started in the late 1990s. This misguided policy leads to inevitable consequences like what we're witnessing in Ferguson. As early as 1999, the Cato Institute warned in a briefing paper, Warrior Cops, the ominous growth of paramilitarism in American police departments, that Program 1033 is a terrible idea. First, dressing police officers as soldiers is dangerous because the mindset of a soldier is entirely inappropriate for a police officer. Soldiers fight a military enemy. Police officers deal with citizens who are ostensibly protected by the Bill of Rights. Second, dressing a cop as a soldier does not make him a soldier. It makes him a more dangerous cop. SWAT teams are not military special forces, even if they try to act like them. And police officers simply do not have the training that military troops have, and giving them the arms, the armament, and the attitude of being warriors is simply dangerous. We'll talk more. He's got a few more points to make, and your calls and thoughts are welcome here at 855-450-FREE. Ferguson, Missouri. Things are, they claim, looking better, according to one story Ellen gave us earlier. But what's really going on tonight in Ferguson as the weekend is kicking up? Will there be more violence? You let us know here on Free Talk Live. When you see the pictures and the footage of the police doing what they're doing in Ferguson, Missouri, with the MRAPs and the Bearcats and the helmets and the fatigues and the big tough guy attitudes, the reflective sunglasses, etc., the dogs, maybe, I don't know if they've shot any dogs yet in Ferguson, but it's probably only a matter of time. When you see the video footage of this stuff happening, does it make you feel like warm in your heart? Do you feel safer? Do you feel like you're protected? When you look at this video footage, do you think to yourself, yes, this is what I want from my county or city police?
I feel like I'm a prisoner in a place where I'm supposed to feel at home.
Well, luckily you're not actually in Ferguson, Missouri. You're here safely in Keene, New Hampshire at the moment.
Right, luckily for me, I'm not in that situation. But I'm just saying, like,
this could be where you live. It
still is frightening. Like, I feel terrible for the people who live in this area. Like, there's no way that they could have predicted this would happen, and yet there it is, just showing up in their backyard.
It reminds me that the entirety of the globe is one giant Stanford prison experiment.
What do you mean by that? And what is the Stanford prison experiment?
The Stanford prison experiment was I guess a psychological experiment that was done in the 70s at Stanford University in California, to where there were a dozen students that volunteered. Well, there were more than that volunteered, but a dozen of the students that volunteered were assigned the roles of prisoners, and another dozen students were assigned the roles of prison guards.
That's right. Randomly.
A makeshift prison was set up in one of the hallways of the college. The prisoners were all arrested by the local police department, taken in, fingerprinted to make it appear as though it were a legitimate arrest, and then they were taken to this secret prison. And the people that were the prison guards were given very few instructions about how to be a prison guard. They were told to exert their authority. And the experiment was supposed to have lasted 2 weeks. It wound up being shut down after 6 days because of how bad things were going.
And if I recall the story from Phil Zimbardo, the guy who was the kind of the college professor involved in it, it was his wife who had to talk sense into him and convince him to shut down the experiment, because she was on the outside of this whole thing. He had gotten involved in this as sort of like basically the warden of the jail. He was
the warden of the jail, as well as the conductor of the experiment, which violates all kinds of rules of ethics.
Oh, yeah.
And I know it was really terrible, even though it's just an experiment. Like, there's people that went on hunger strikes.
Oh, yeah, there was abuse.
There's people being beaten, nudity, making them get up at random hours in the night and do push-ups.
Humiliation.
Zimbardo actually was called as an expert witness in the hearings that were held after the Abu Ghraib situation. And one thing that he testified to was, hey, I ran an Abu Ghraib type thing for a week in the 70s doing this experiment, and I can tell you right now that you don't have to tell your soldiers to torture people. You tell them as little as possible, and torture will happen automatically.
Yeah, and he was just doing let's play pretend. These, of course, guys are in a real situation with real victims and real prisoners. It's Stanford Prison Experiment is fascinating to read. You did a great job summarizing it, but anybody who takes the time, Zimbardo actually has a website that he put up that includes photos and reports and gives you a good rundown of some of the real grisly details of how bad things went.
And then Davi Barker, who, Davi, he's one of the advertisers occasionally on this show. He wrote a book, Authoritarian Sociopathy, where he looks at the Stanford Prison Experiment, the Milgram Experiment, and other experiments that show, that basically anybody that is given an authoritative role will wind up turning evil.
So the Milgram experiment was the one where they shocked the people in the other room and they
Yes.
like turned up the dial
That's
slowly.
correct.
Yes, and Stanley Milgram, the guy that put that experiment together, he hypothesized beforehand that only 1 to 3% will wind up giving the full shock. And it wound up being somewhere near 2/3 of the people.
Daryl, why did you bring up Stanford Prison Experiment in the first place? You said this whole thing or the whole world?
The militarization of the police, what's going on in Ferguson, what's going on in Iraq, in Gaza, everywhere around the world. You have people in authoritative roles that just wind up being more evil than the batch that they replaced.
Yeah, and of course, as you increase the militarization of the police, you shouldn't be surprised when the police officers start to act like a military squad and, start to treat people like they're in a war zone as opposed to treating people like they have human rights.
Right, and if there's anything that we can learn from these experiments, it's that human nature, like, you're going to feed off of the negative effects of the people around you. So if there's somebody who's, being a bit too aggressive and you're working with them, that kind of rubs off on you.
It could, and we certainly don't see very many police trying to stop the aggressiveness of the other police. Even if the aggressiveness isn't rubbing off on all the other cops, there's certainly the problem where the other cops who are supposedly the good cops are not saying anything, they're not doing anything, they're not stepping in to stop. Whoa, hey,
Right.
You can't do that to him.
Well, they're conditioned to think that it's normal.
Well, we've
it's
seen a
acceptable.
couple of examples over the last couple of years. Very few examples.
Where a cop steps in, you mean?
To where a police officer steps in,
Yeah.
and then it's that officer that gets reprimanded and loses their job.
Sure. Or like the one who arrested the speeder. There was like a state cop who arrested a speeding cop in South Florida. She was targeted by several police after that
Yes.
with threats and investigations into her personal information.
Hey, you just crossed the thin blue line over
That's what
here.
she did. That's what she did. So back to the story here, real quick. A little bit more from CNN.com. They've got an article from Cato Institute. One of their guys. This is Tim Lynch. He's talking about how dressing the police as soldiers is very, very dangerous because of the mindset, the mentality. And that's what you're pointing out here, Daryl, with the prison experiment. These were college students in the prison experiment. 1 week they were college students. The next week they were just playing pretend in this fake prison. And all of a sudden they became prison guards in the way they acted towards these others. And the people that were the prisoners started acting like victims, and they started acting into the role of prisoner. And anyway, going on here, these are some of the reasons why you shouldn't dress the police as military. Third, he says if cities really need a SWAT unit, they should be reserved for extraordinary situations beyond the capability of the ordinary patrolman, such as a hostage scenario. Such SWAT units should not be deployed for routine policing calls. And that, of course, was the original intention, as I understand it, behind the SWAT program, was that they were only supposed to respond to the most extreme, dangerous situations. But of course, like all government programs, SWAT has expanded out far beyond the original intentions of the program to include, they've even done SWAT raids, as I understand it, on people who owe money on school loans.
And SWAT is an acronym that stands for Special Weapons and Tactics.
Yeah. The escalation of conflict in Ferguson didn't have to occur. If the Pentagon hands local cops millions of dollars worth of hammers, it should be no surprise when suddenly everything looks like a nail. We can only hope the situation ends without more violence. If President Obama wants to do something about the awful events in Ferguson, he should end Program 1033, which comes back around to what you were saying earlier, Ellen. You've got a quote from Obama making it sound like he doesn't think anyone should be violent. The police shouldn't be violent. The protesters shouldn't be violent. Well, that's great, but what are you actually doing about it? You point out he's on vacation. What has he done in the past? Well, he's presided over the distribution of this military equipment.
Yeah.
If he really cared about police militarization and the police being violent toward protesters, he could have put a stop to the program.
He could have, but I guess it's not important enough for him to step in and take action.
Of course not. It's easier for a politician to talk rather than do something. So it costs Barack Obama no political capital to get up and speak out about the violence. This is terrible. This violence is terrible. All the while, he's the one presiding over the most violent entity known to mankind, the U.S. federal government.
Well, and the federal government actually winds up benefiting from giving away all of these Bearcats.
They can buy new material.
Well, not only that, all of the Bearcats and MRAPs and other things that are given away by DHS have the DHS logo on them, which means that DHS can use them whenever they want to.
Good point. Yeah, that is one of the terms that the local police department had to agree to when they accepted the Bearcat, is that when the feds want to use it, they can come in and commandeer it anytime they want. There's more on the way here. It's Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.